Welcome, everyone. I'm Maggie Ostara, and I'm so delighted to talk to you today with Manda Scott. I want to introduce Manda a little bit here, just personally, and I'm going to let her introduce herself. But Manda, I learned about her through her Boudica books, which are about the Roman invasion of what they called Britannica, and now we call the UK. And I was so moved by the story and so incredibly impressed by the writing. Wow, this woman can write. And it really gave me an access to my own heritage that I didn't have, and also an understanding about what it would be like to be colonized as an Indigenous person, which I haven't had as a member of the colonizers in America. It's a very different perspective for me. So Manda really opened up a whole set of perspectives and understandings that I didn't have before. So that's how she originally came to me. And then I discovered the Accidental Gods podcast, which I am an avid listener to. And then I learned about THRUTOPIA, which is what we're going to talk about today. So THRUTOPIA is the basic idea that we need to be creating narratives about how we get through the crises that we're in right now. And we tend as a culture, Western culture, to put a lot of energy into dystopias, to apocalypse and Armageddon and so on. And so why do we allow our precious life force energy and imaginations to be colonized by those type of stories? And why don't we do something else? So that's what it's all about. So Manda has really kind of picked this up and is doing some really exciting things with it. So welcome, Manda. I'm so glad you're here.
Thank you. I am so grateful for this, Maggie. It's fantastic, and thank you for such a kind introduction. That was very lovely. Yeah, I think you said everything we need to say, mind you, but we could maybe unpick some of it a little bit more detail.
No, not at all. So I gave a just very basic introduction to THRUTOPIAs, but tell us a little bit about yourself and why you came to THRUTOPIA. Like, what was the inspiration for you to move in this direction?
Okay, so the short answer is existential panic, and the slightly longer answer is when I wrote the Boudica books, my intention was this is who we were, this is who we could be. This is not that I want us to be living an Iron Age lifestyle, but that for me, we're living now at the end of the Roman Empire and its influence in terms of creating a culture that values everything by money. We know the price of everything and the value of nothing. And this isn't that the Romans invented it, but they spread it very effectively around the Western world. And I wanted to show who we were with the Boudica books on the belief that if everybody understood that, we could just let go of the Romanization and actually live as real human beings. But it didn't quite work out like that. It's 20 years this year since the first one came out, I think. But I started teaching the shamanic stuff, and I genuinely thought I'd stopped writing. The last book came out in 2017, 18 even, I can't remember. Anyway, it came out a while ago. And I thought the publishing cycle is too slow, and it doesn't, I didn't have any of the books that I had in mind. I have sequels to Boudica. I'm in the middle of writing 2084. I've got things that I was writing, but none of them really addressed the crisis of the moment. And there seemed to be faster ways of doing that. And then last summer, I was leading a particular one of the shamanic courses that I teach, and I was drumming for the students. And I don't normally journey when I'm drumming. And this time I did. And I also don't normally get clear text stuff. But what I got was really clear instruction that I have a 30,000-year-old fossilized horse's tooth that holds part of the ancestor gate in my altar, and I was teaching the ancestor gate. And I had to take this tooth, get some horse skin, which turned out not to be as easy as I thought, and bind it to a particular place on a very old hawthorn tree on our land, and then sit with my back to that in a very particular frame of mind, watching the sun go down for an hour every evening until further notice, basically. And because of the timing when this came, and because it was so clear, because the text was, very rarely to get things that are actual do this instructions that clearly. So I did it. And it was August by the time I got the horse skin and got it all bound up. And by the end of the first week of sitting on the hill as the sun went down, I had the book in my head. And the book is set primarily in 2024. The bit that came while I was on the hill is woman lying with her grandson beside her, and he says, "Hey, Granny, when you come home, can we do stuff? Go and watch the crows go to bed in the wood," which is what he knows she likes doing. And she says, "I'm dying. I'm not coming home now. This is just not going to happen. You do know this. We have had this conversation." And in this ensuing conversation, he says to her, "You're the only one that gets me. I don't want to live in a world without you in it." And she realizes he's serious. And she says, "I don't know what happens next, but if it's possible, if you call and really need me, I will come." And they both feel the kind of the gods and the world stop, because she's just made a vow of the sort that he can't undo. And then she dies. And then the rest of the book is told from her perspective of being in that hinterland between the worlds of the living and the worlds of the dead, because she can't, even when her partner dies a few weeks later, she can't go with her to wherever we go next, because she's made this promise. And then we move to 2024, and what I'm writing at the moment is, because I think we need an insurrection now. We need a revolution, but it needs to be peaceful. The current system is broken. It is completely not working, and we don't have time to go through the very, very slow iterations it would take to fix it. We just don't. And I've had my timescales really sharpened recently by a thing called the GOES report, which is Global Oceanic Environmental Survey. And the breakdown of that is 50% of our atmospheric oxygen comes from phytoplankton. So there's two lots of little beings in the sea. There's the ones that take in oxygen, give out CO2, which is zooplankton, and there's the phytoplankton, which take in CO2 and give out oxygen. 50% of our oxygen comes from the oceans. A combination of falling pH, so acidity because of the CO2, and toxins from runoff, mainly from agriculture, and microplastics is killing the phytoplankton. If we do nothing, the pH will drop. It's currently at 8.05. If it drops to 7.94, the oceans are dead. At which point we have 50% less CO2, oxygen in the atmosphere, which will be like standing at the top of Kilimanjaro, just on an ordinary day at sea level. And this is going to happen by 2045. We have 24 years to turn that around. And if we don't turn it around a lot sooner than that, these things don't turn around overnight. So I am writing this now and trying to work out how can we peacefully change the system, and then what do we moving to? Because this is what I think nobody seems to be doing. As you said, we have so many dystopias. Everybody can create in their heads the kind of survivalist nightmare that's somewhere between The Road and Handmaid's Tale, where we're all being kebabbed over piles of burning tires by our bigger and nastier neighbors. And if we give that our energy, as you said, that is where we'll go. But I think the reason that so many people are in denial about the climate and ecological emergency, or just carrying on as if nothing were happening, is because we don't have the visions of where we could go instead that we would want to get to. So the point of what I'm writing and of the THRUTOPIA masterclass is to try and create as many stories as we can get of futures that we would be proud to leave to the generations that come after us. I want our grandkids to be talking to each other going, God, we so nearly missed it, but that generation had the courage and the vision and the collective momentum to do things that got us to here. And yes, they left it too late, but they still did it. And we are here, and life is good because of them. And I still think that's possible. But we have to, if we don't give people the ideas and show them how it's done, right, create the roadmaps, then it won't happen. And that's just not happening. You turn on the television just now, and what do you see? It's business as usual, because people haven't got the ideas. And it's hard. That's the thing I'm discovering with the book. If I hadn't been running the podcast for 2 years, I would have no clue. So there we go. That's the kind of lengthy, that's how it is, and that's where we get to.
Yes, thank you. And I think that part of the problem right now too, like you said, there's a lack of imagination going in that direction. And there's also a lot of overwhelm and a lot of grief and a lot of fear. that are feeding people's distraction. And of course, our, so much of the economy is based on distraction and entertainment, which is something I've been talking about a lot lately, is how do we break the trance of all of that entertainment and distraction and so on. And it's so easy to do, it's just so easy to do. And I love this idea of THRUTOPIA. I know, Joanna Macy has been talking about this for a long time, her version of that, right? What do we do with the great turning?
The great unraveling. Yes.
What do we do? And also, there's a variety of different people who've been talking about this, but I love the way that you're creating an opportunity for people to really be working with the narrative pieces of it, right? And that it is, we are meaning-making machines, right?
Yes.
Human beings are meaning-making machines. Stories, sometimes in certain spiritual realms or even psychological realms get a bad rap, like, oh, that's just story. And I'm like, well, that story is how we learn. It's how we communicate. It's how indigenous people around the world have passed on their understanding of the world for millennia. So it's not that story is the problem. It's more that when we get locked into programmed stories that don't serve us, that's a problem, but that's not narrative's problem. It's more about how, part of our minds work. And this is part of the dystopia and the Armageddon and all that, is these are programmed narratives that we just keep recycling with slightly different flavors at times. It occurred to me, Amanda, have you read The Fifth Sacred Thing? Do you know that book? Right?
Yes, I read it years ago.
Because that was written a long time ago now, 25 years ago or something like that. And even though it's dystopian, it also has a bit of a THRUTOPIan piece to it, as does the Gaia Codex. Do you know the Gaia Codex?
I don't.
And that is full on like breakdown dystopia, but it also has an outcome much in the future that but it doesn't do, just to note this, it doesn't do the piece that you're talking about, which is how do we get from that breakdown, because it skips forward like, I don't know, 500 years or something, and all of a sudden we're in another world. But it does give us a sense of what another world is, which is cool. So what you're really talking about and what you're going to be supporting people with through this masterclass is how do we actually take those steps to imagine that pathway. And so tell us a little bit about, you told us a little bit about your book, and tell us a little bit about the challenges that you're facing with that. Like, what is it that actually comes up for you as you're working your way through that? I mean, you're a highly experienced novelist. What have you written? 17 books?
16. This is number 17. Yeah.
This is 17. You've written 16 books. Okay. So you're a highly experienced novelist. This is not like a new novelist trying to figure this out, right? So you understand narrative, you understand timeline, you understand characterization. Like, you've got all those pieces down. And yet I know I've heard you say, and you mentioned, how challenging this is. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, this is interesting. So one thing, before we go on to that, I just want to say, if people are interested, the only THRUTOPIan novel that I've read that is actually, I think, a genuine THRUTOPIA at the moment is Kim Stanley Robinson's Ministry for the Future.
Okay.
And that is absolutely set now, and it shows a way through. I don't think the future that they get to is necessarily, for me, it's too much of this is business as usual, but we've just managed to kind of make it work a little bit so that we didn't actually destroy the planet. But he still tried. He really has, and it's well worth reading, because that gets to the core of what I am finding. I think we need total systemic change. And if we read all of the non-fiction people, so Joanna Macy with her 3 pillars of the Great Turning, or Charles Eisenstein with his visions of the more beautiful future our hearts know is possible, the detail of how we get there, for me, is missing. We've got kind of visions of the sort of thing that we might need to do. Jeremy Lent's working on it too. His first book was called The Patterning Instinct, and then he's got Webs of Meaning, and he's writing Eco-Civilization as we speak. all of it requires that people behave differently than they do at the moment. That we have some kind of spiritual, emotional awakening and grow up, basically, as a species. And I think that's probably true. I think we do need to get there, but I am trying to walk the path of how we get there without taking the people who are the readers, one assumes, will be people who kind of think this might be a good idea, but they also haven't walked the path. And so how do you present? So supposing I've reached the point where I've got a youth momentum, so youth is anybody under 30, really, Generation Z, whatever we're going to call them, to go, the system is broken, we have to change. How do you do that in a way that is non-violent? Because it has to be non-violent, because that's what growing up is. It's no longer throwing rocks at the bad guys. That just isn't the way we need. And yet not going down the fifth sacred thing path, because the thing that I found deeply distressing at the end of that was that the answer was to keep walking into the gunfire, rank after row after row, until the people firing got tired of killing other people. And I look around the world and I'm not convinced that moment ever happens. And particularly not now, because you don't have to stand there with a gun and watch them die in front of you. You just press a button and the drone moves, 10,000 miles an hour and hits them from a very long distance, and you don't care. And the people who don't care, I don't think are ever going to care. I think that, so I need to find a more creative answer than just wait till the bodies pile up till they get bored. And so that, exactly the roadmap of embedded in this culture, with all that you said of social media destroying the trust in democracy, with the attention economy just that is harvesting our attention as we speak, how do we lift people and lead them through in a way that takes the readers with us, and then show them the world that we get to that feels like it's worth it, and have mapped out a kind of sense of, okay, if I can do a dozen things or be a dozen things and embody these things, then this is possible. That it is possible that I too could get here. It's got to feel grounded. It's got to feel doable. And that's hard. It's daily, that staring at a blank sheet until your forehead bleeds, of not so much the narrative arc, but the energetic arc of not getting people in. What do you do when the system brings the tanks out, which they will, because they're not, the people who have power are not going to just go, yeah, kids, you can have it. Sorry, don't worry, we screwed up for all your lives and the last 2,000 years, but don't worry, we can just step back now. It's not going to happen. And yet you don't want to meet force with force, because that doesn't work. But I have a character in the book say, we don't want to end up like, I think, Thailand, but I could be wrong. Where was the Khmer Rouge? Cambodia. And they're a Buddhist country, and the parliament, as Buddhists, decided that what they were going to do was sit and debate what should be their national flower for 3 days while the Khmer Rouge were hurling rocket-propelled grenades at the front door of the parliament. And they all died. And tens of thousands of people died too. Pol Pot was not a fun guy. And that kind of passive, we're just going to sit here and not fight because we're pacifists, I don't think that's going to work either. We need to find something that's active but not violent, and it's been really interesting.
Yeah, I think you're really pointing to the gap. And because I've been walking through the Marvel universe with my kid lately, because my kid is 20 and I finally agreed to do that. I always rebelled against it because I said, do that with your dad. Your dad's into it, But I also, because I'm not interested in the violence and I'm not interested in certain aspects of it, but I am interested in the fascination with superheroes and with superpowers and this desire for super beings, and what that inspires in us in a way. And of course, the problem with those movies are that we watch it, we get adrenaline, we get endorphins, we can even feel elated at the end if you can manage the violence. But then given a little bit of time, that all kind of diminishes and then nothing changes, right? Because it doesn't actually present anything to the to the viewer that then they get to do, or they get to participate in. There is a little bit of evolution in those movies where they're starting to show that some of the heroes are not, they actually don't have superpowers, and they have human issues. I mean, there is a kind of interesting thing going on there, but I do think that there's something about the interest in, I would just call it our evolution as human beings, because I don't think we are adults as human beings yet. We're still locked in this adolescence where we haven't gotten to this point where, like you said, we realize nonviolence has to be nonviolent, because blowing each other up is an adolescent thing to do, right? It's actually a little bit more like a toddler thing to do than even an adolescent thing to do. And of course, that's what feminine sovereignty is about, right? Where we've talked about that before, because that is a process of how we evolve ourselves into that maturity where we can be the people who do this. But I haven't developed a narrative out of that about, okay, when we do that, well, then what happens, right? But I do think that there's a way that if we can understand that spiritual growth process, that evolutionary process, does kind of make us into super beings, in the sense, in relation to where we are now, or certainly in relation to the really even kind of semi Neanderthal, like, might makes right, let's just blow shit up until we get what we want kind of thing, right? People who actually have the ability to, stay calm and focused and compassionate in very challenging situations, and meet those challenges. That is almost a super being in our world today, right? So anyway, I just bring that up because I do think that there are potentials that are beyond maybe what we think of as, if I were to put myself in how I am right now inside of a narrative, like if I were to imagine, how does that character need to develop? Like, what is it? What are the capacities that they have to develop to actually be a person who's helping to bring that THRUTOPIA through, right? As well as maybe the actual steps, or the narrative trajectory, but that character development.
Yes, and it's got to be congruent, and it's got to also not lose people by the, if we start saying, okay, so she sat down and meditated for 6 hours, and at the end of the meditation she felt this, we're going to lose everyone who doesn't meditate, which frankly, let's face it, is 99.9% of the population. Lots of people think about meditating and they download the apps and they think about it a lot, but the number of people who actually do it is vanishingly small. And yet, anyone who's done any work at all, we know that somewhere along the line we have to learn to hone our intent and find grounding and connect with the web of life, and that, I think, for me, that's the superpower. Because I think one of the things that we realize, I think you and I, is it's our culture is the 5-year-old in the room who's been handed the hand grenades. Indigenous cultures are looking out onto the outside going, what are you doing? But the toddler with the hand grenades is a very, very dangerous thing. So and a lot of my Indigenous friends are going, well, you just need to learn to be more Indigenous, which is a really, I'm sure is true, but I think we have a vanishingly tight timescale. And my question then is, how do I get the entire population of the Western world to be more Indigenous in 10 years? And I don't think telling them that they need to be more Indigenous will even, most people, the kind of people that I would meet if I went to our local big city, which is Birmingham, and stopped them in the street and said, how do you feel about being more Indigenous? They'd look at me like I was talking Greek. It's like, that's not even a phrase that would mean anything to them. So it's not going to get there. So on an absolute practical level, how can we write the process of connecting with the web of life and becoming more fully adultly human in a way that resonates with ordinary people who would otherwise be watching the Kardashians or whatever. I didn't even have a television, so I'm not even sure what that is, but it sounds like a good thing. And I don't know is the honest answer. I'm still working on it. It's a work in progress. I partly have cheated because I've got someone who's dead as my main protagonist, so they can walk. They can engage with the crows particularly, or with other people's dreams in ways that work because she's not a living person and she doesn't have to sit down and meditate for 20 hours to get there. She just walks out and the crows are there. So
Right.
it's
Right.
that I didn't know that. When I started writing, I was just writing what I got on the hill. So I think partly I have to trust the process of this, because this book feels it's extraordinarily hard work. I'm not suggesting that I just sit here and the pixies write it for me, but which would be very nice. Anyone's listening, that'd be great. But it does feel as if my job, and I think the job, if we do get to the place where we're really connected, for me, the job of humanity is to learn to be able to connect to the web of life and ask, what do you want of me? And then act on the answers in real time. And if I believe that, then I need to be actually doing it. And this is me doing it. And writing this book to the best of my ability, and I'm sure it will be flawed and it will have, big errors, but it's a start. And then the THRUTOPIA course is me going, it needs to be more than just me doing this. And it needs not just to be novels. We need television scripts and movies and plays and poems and songs and nonfiction of everything that is writing, blogs, haiku, I don't care, little TikTok videos, things that are helping us to see that the future doesn't have to be the Handmaid's Tale or the road.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and one of the things I want to underscore here that I really like is this is really an inquiry. Like none of us have the answers at this point, right? I mean, so this is an inquiry, and it's an invitation to decolonize our imaginations and to reclaim them and indigenize them, if we want to talk about it that way, right? Yeah. Because here's the thing is, our imaginations were more free for many, many millennia, more than they've been colonized, right? For sure. I mean, yes. If we look at the history of humanity, right, let's just call it 100,000 years. Some people call it 200,000 years. I don't know. I'm not an expert in that area, but I know it's a really long time. Yeah. Right? It's a really long time. Even if you say 30,000 years, right? Which is compared to the 5,000 years of so-called known history that we know and that we get taught about.
We've had writing.
It's still way, way, way longer than that. And our imaginative capacity was much bigger, and our ability to dream, which is what you teach about the dreaming. And so for me, it's a decolonizing process, right? Of being able to, I call it deprogramming or deconditioning, decolonizing, and being able to strip off those layers. And I really believe, aligned with what you were just saying, that, we connect to the web of life and then we do what we're directed to do, right? Is that the solutions are not going to come from our left brain, and they're not going to come from our linear logical thinking, and they're not going to come even from looking at our past, in the sense that we need really new breakthrough, out of the box ideas, which a lot of my work is about supporting people to be able to decolonize themselves so that they can receive those. And then not only do they receive them, but then they write them down, and then they write them down, and then they do something with them.
Yes.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. Yes. Definitely.
So there is a part of me, and I'm naturally optimistic, but there's a part of me that feels excited about this whole possibility, and that unfortunately a species, just like an individual, sometimes doesn't do the thing that they know they want and need until their back's up against the wall and they have to, which is kind of where we're at this point. Like we have to, we don't really, if we don't, well,
we're toast.
So I love that what you're providing is a place for inquiry, for heartstorming and brainstorming, for trying things out, for soundboarding, and also just for that flourishing of that decolonized imagination. And even to be able to be with others whose purpose is to do that, and for us to recognize in other people where we go, oh wow, that was just a really colonized idea I just had. Wasn't it? Okay, all right, let's recalibrate, because that's part of what we have to be doing in order for us to be making our way through. So tell us a little bit about this masterclass. So we've talked a little bit about why and what you're doing with that, why it's important. And so tell us about this masterclass. which I signed up for within 20 minutes of when I got the email.
You're a wonderful woman. Thank you.
Like, yes.
Yay, good. Alrighty. So this is my attempt to create a space, exactly as you said, where people can come together and the research phase. So the research phase of any book, I guess, whether nonfiction or fiction, certainly for fiction, it's the most fun bit. This is where I get to tell myself I'm working and I'm just reading stuff or listening to stuff and kind of doing that pattern matching, meaning making thing that you said that people do, which is exactly what we have to do, because you have to write the book from a foundation of understanding. So it's over 6 months. It starts on the 1st of May. The last that we know of at the moment event is the 16th of October. So there's every alternate Sunday, and it will be evenings our time, which is kind of middle of the day your time, I think. So it's
early morning for me,
oh,
dear.
Is it?
Yes, it's okay.
All right. It was, yeah. We've got a couple of speakers from Australia. We're going to have to get up at 3 a.m. unless we manage to change the time zone. So we'll probably change it for them. So it might be easier for you then. Anyway, so the plan is we gather as many writers as want to come, really. I think probably a max of 150, because that's the Dunbar number. Are you familiar with that? That's Ian Dunbar said that was the number of a tribe. That's a number of people that you can get to know individually before they start to be too many and get overwhelmed. And then if there was more than 150, they would split off and a new tribe would start. So we're going for the Dunbar number. Of as many, the spread of as much writing as we can possibly get. Just because I'm a novelist doesn't mean only fiction, definitely. I want everyone who, even if who aren't ever planning to be published, this is about generating stories. We're going to bring in, we've got 13 speakers every alternate Sunday for 6 months of people who are really the best and most articulate that I could find, also who would come and do it, which actually was the limiting factor often, in their fields. So transport, energy, regenerative cities, regenerative agriculture, politics and decision making, all of the things that I could think of that I could gather people for, to give us data, really, to give us the research. They're going to come and talk for half an hour, most of them, and then we have half an hour of questions. Then they can go away, quarter of an hour break, and then we'll have a 90-minute masterclass where we as a group, and in small groups, and then in slightly bigger groups, and then the whole group, can work with everything we've been given. So in the beginning, it'll be just what we heard just now. And by the end of October, it'll be everything we heard for 6 months of how do we feel really first? Because you're exactly right. This decolonizing thing, the changing our own frames, I found, recognizing when I hit up against a frame and then letting it go is the single most challenging thing. We are so conditioned that the world is the way we've been told it is, and it isn't. And letting that just be not, and not panicking and thinking, well, I've got to fit someone in its place, and letting something evolve is huge. But also just the practical data. If we get, so the remit for the speakers is, what's it like in the 2030s if we made the good decisions now, and what are those good decisions? So what does a regenerative city look like? If I was talking to this lovely lady the other day, and she said, well, the really cool thing would be to get 3D printing that works with hempcrete rather than concrete. I said, does that not exist? And she went, no. I said, okay, so making that happen, having the research in the next 10 years, it can't be hard to do that, would be really cool. And what happens if you've had to move Miami 100 miles inland because Miami's going to be underwater in 10 years? What does it feel like? What does it look like? How does the transport work? What does the sewage system do? How does money work if we decide we don't want a system that's predicated on, banks make money out of nothing and then sell it to us at a profit? And then we all play catch up for the rest of our lives trying to pay them back. How does the system work if we get to design it now? And it'll be evolving. This isn't a finite thing. It's not, okay, we're going to put this all in place and then everything's fine. It'll be testing things out. And what does the testing look like? Who decides whether it succeeded or not? What happens if it doesn't? What happens if it does? All of those things. But mainly, how do we get everybody on the planet trying this together? Because there's no point if half of the population of any country does it and the other half is busy dismantling it while they're doing it. If we spend all of our emotional energy on friction against each other, we're not fixing the problems. which is, you know, why the fossil fuel industry puts so much effort into making sure that half the country doesn't even believe climate change is happening. Because if they can be convinced that any change you make is obviously designed to destroy them because you want to kill them, then they're not going to come along. How do we get everybody going, oh yeah, that's a good future? And it doesn't matter if I don't believe in climate change or not, that's a future I'd want for my kids. How do we do that? So we'll have the 13 main speakers, and then we've got a whole bunch of other people coming in. I'll do some spiritual stuff, Daniel Thorson from the Emerge podcast, Mary Reynolds, Eileen Siegfried. I've got Sharon Blackie, who wrote a lot of When Women Rose Rooted. It's her main one. She's going to come and talk about the heroic journey. And because that's such a core structure. You were talking about Marvel comics, but heroes, you know, from Enish Kugal, way back since writing started, the hero has been the core of the journey, male or female. And is that, I have a question of, is that so embedded in our hardwiring that in 10 years we cannot dismantle it? And I think 10 years is the longest that we have to really turn everything around. If nothing else, yeah, I'll talk about the GOES report when we do the actual event. There's some basic chemistry happening in the world that if we don't really turn things around in 10 years, then we can forget it. So how do we do that? And how do we work with narrative structures that we understand and let them evolve into ones that are still recognizable and still touch people? Because that's what story does. Even if we think it's nonfiction, we're still telling a story. Mm-hmm. We're still everything everybody does. If we enter a new relationship, or buy a car, or get a new job, or move house, it's because we've told ourselves stories of what it's going to be like and built pictures. And very, very rarely, I don't know about your life, but mine often, the reality is nothing like what I thought, but the stories got me there. And then I can deal with the reality. Right. Does that all make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it does. I think I want to just throw in here, just really my perspective, but that I'm not sure. I think everybody has to get on board. I think that we have to have a critical mass of people get on board. And I think that can look really different with different people. So I just want to say that, you know, like what that actually means for people, because we are a very diverse population and people have really different ways of even understanding
what do you
what
think
reality
the critical mass is, though?
Oh, I don't know. I don't know what it is.
Yeah.
I don't know what it is, but I don't think it's 100%.
Okay.
I mean, I actually got, when I was doing, you could call it shamanic work at one point, this was a good over 20 years ago. And I was in a deep, dark hole about what was happening in our world and where I thought we were going. And my guides basically came in and said, reality is not what you think it is. And it can all change like that when the consciousness of the planet reaches a certain level. And I don't know what that means, right? But that's actually what sent me into working primarily on changing our consciousness, changing our consciousness. I think you're right. Because I was like, okay, I don't know where it's all going. I don't know what all the paths are. I don't know anything of that. But what I do know is that when the level of consciousness changes to a certain state, different things will become possible. And what those things are, I don't know. I mean, I do think that what you're talking about with THRUTOPIA is actually part of it, right? Because we're changing our consciousness when we do this. So this is one of the projects that's doing that. I actually think there's a lot of projects that are happening that are in that vein. They just look all kinds of different ways, depending on who's doing it and what they care about and so on. So, so for me, that brings me hope, because honestly, if I think 100% of the population has to get on board, I kind of go, well, I don't really see the way that's going to happen. But that's okay, because we can have different ways of thinking about these things. We don't have to agree about everything. That's not the point. The point is to generate ideas and possibilities and ways things can happen. I just love cats. They always seem to love to come on during interviews.
He's got a thing about Zoom, this cat.
It cracks me up how they do that.
The other two never bother, but this one just wants to Zoom bomb all the time.
So this
is River, everybody. He's a
in Zoom meetings, right? It cracks me up. Okay, so that's happening, and it's and you know, I signed up for it because I really wanted to engage with others in the process of decolonizing my imagination. That was what was my, I was like, okay, because I write, you know, I write a lot, like every day, but I don't write fiction. But I use narrative. I tell stories, you know, in almost every one of my emails, I tell a story. And so I think that just the process of doing that, whether or not you're a writer, is vital. And I think that what I'm hearing from your lineup of speakers is you're providing the education for people who want to do that, who haven't taken the time, don't want to take the time to go out and do the research to find out who they can listen to, right? I mean, like, I'm one of those people. I mean, I listen to Accidental Gods because you do that already, and you're providing all of these people. And so that helps me because I don't have to go out and find them. I find them through you. And it sounds like this is, you know, a kind of next level of that, but then you actually get to also, not only you get to talk to the speakers, but then the group is learning together and growing together and stuff. So would it be accurate to say that even if you don't consider yourself a writer in particular, that this could be really beneficial for you just in your mindset, your decolonizing process? It could change the way you show up at work, for example, or how you talk in a meeting or whatever. Yeah. Is that fair to say?
I would seriously hope so. Yes. Thank you. Thank you. That's brilliant. I should get you doing this all the time, Maggie. You're fantastic. Yes. That's, I would like at the end of it, there to be some novels or some scripts, because I think, you know, particularly television is the way that we reach hundreds of millions of people. But actually, the thing that makes the difference is the conversations we have one-on-one. And exactly that. If somebody comes along and they go home and they, you know, even just talk to someone in the queue at the supermarket, and they have that vision and the energy that comes with having a vision. I think one of the things that I'm watching in the world at the moment, and again, my own shamanic stuff, is a very, very long time ago, my very first teacher said there are two energies in the world. There's love and there's hate, or love and fear, actually, she said. And I'm watching the thing that feasts on fear, feeding a lot at the moment. And my job, part of my job with my students, with myself, is not feeding the fear thing. Feeding the other wolf, if you like, that story of the old wolves. There's the wolf of the anger and the wolf of the love, and which one grows is the one that you feed. Don't feed the fear one. And I think the opposite of not feeding fear is feeding that vision of a future that we can wake up in the morning and go, yeah, God, the day is going to be amazing. I have no idea what's happening, you know, and it might not be comfortable all the time, but I know that I have the resilience and the resources and the world is there, that today is going to be absolutely fantastic. And I will go to bed at the end of the day knowing that if that was my last day on earth, I have no regrets. It was as good as it could be. And walking with that energy in the world changes the world. It's as much an act of creation and magic as anything else that we can do. And I just want to help people have that sense so that we can spread it, because I think it does. It, in the same way that the fear spreads and gathers momentum, this can spread and gather momentum. We don't have to fall into terror. But we need the vision, because otherwise it's too easy to paint disasters.
Yes, I agree. But what just popped into my mind is there's a scene late in the Boudica books, it might even be the last one, where the young girl comes into the environment of the elders, and she's I think she's asked to dream. I don't remember exactly what the setup is, but she has this whole vision about how this particularly critical battle is going to go, right? I mean, she sees the entire thing, right? And she thinks it's happening. Like, she's in it. She thinks she's witnessing it, right? And when she comes out, she realizes, no, like, she just had this whole vision. And it gives the people, the elders in the community, the understanding of how to go. Like, what do they need to watch out for? What are going to be the pitfalls? How are they going to proceed? Now, of course, that's about a battle, right? Because that was the environment and that was the situation. But the process of having somebody who can tap into the potentials and can see the way through that even the other adepts don't get, right? And then pay them to pass that vision on so that others can then go, oh, okay, we can take some actions in relation to this vision that we were given. I think that that's part of what you're really talking about here, right? Where we're saying, let's open up to what the web of life, I call it the flow of life, what the creative intelligence of the universe, because I really believe there's a whole lot of support up there in non-physical going, okay, humanity, this is your moment. Like, are you going to get it together? We've got a whole lot of ideas for you. Are you open to hearing them? Or are you just going to stay locked watching Netflix? Are you going to do that? Right. But that we can be conduits for those visions and those ideas, and not necessarily all of them are going to play out and not necessarily they're all going to be beneficial. But if enough of us practice that, some things are going to come through. And then if we start writing novels or we start doing whatever we do with them, right, sharing them, even if we have storytelling circles where people just start telling stories,
totally.
like, I mean, that's a very indigenous thing to do, right? That we could bring up again would be more storytelling just to each other. It's interesting that scene just popped into my mind. You know what I'm talking about, right?
Yeah.
Well, it's so good. So how does somebody get involved with THRUTOPIA?
So it's THRUTOPIA is THRUTOPIA. It comes from Rupert Read, who's a philosopher at UEA, wrote a paper way back in 2017 in Huffington Post saying that this is what we needed. I didn't read it until this year, but hey, last year. He spelled the word, and I've just, with his permission, we're going to just create a new genre, really. So THRUtopia.life is the website. Go there and read whatever you need to read to see it. There's join us buttons all over it. My wonderful wife created the website. So just join. It should be that straightforward. And we can put a link, I think, probably somehow
we'll put a link in the description.
Thank you. Yeah, that'd be perfect. Yeah, just come along and we'd be delighted to see you. Yes, I'm sorry it's early in the morning with you. I'm very sorry.
No, I think it's like 8 a.m. So it's not horrible.
Okay, it's not unbearable. All right.
It's not unbearable. But it's just usually I'm doing my practice at 8 a.m. So I have to shift my schedule.
Everything will be recorded. So
I'm gonna. Are you kidding? I'm gonna show up. No, I want to be in the energy of it. I don't want to not, especially because I want to be there for that 90 minutes where everybody's learning together and all of that. Yeah. So it's a whole package. It's okay. I put it in my calendar. It's all right. I'm gonna do it. And we would love to see any of you who are inspired by this to come. And I just want to underscore, as a nonfiction writer myself, that whatever your creative project is, you can be enriched and inspired and decolonized by coming and participating in this. And I actually, listening to Manda did a little thing for writers and her external podcast. I started having stories going in my mind. So who knows, maybe I'll start writing some fiction too.
But you could be, you could be a sculptor or a painter or anything creative. It doesn't have to be just writing. Whatever it is, if we have a sense of this future and our art can help other people to get the energy of it and move towards it, then that's what we're after for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right. Any last words you want to share, Manda, as we wrap up?
I don't think so. The only thing that leapt up while you were talking was I discovered recently that the cave paintings in southwest France, the ones, the really old, that you have to go way, way underground and they're in total darkness, 1,000 generations of people created those. It was over 30,000 years. That's how long those stories lasted. Wow. And so I want to create stories that will take us through the next 30,000 years. So,
beautiful. Yes. Let's make it so.
Yes.
All right. Thanks everyone for joining us.
Thanks, guys.
And I hope you'll join us if it's inspiring for you. And do please tell your friends, pass it around. We need as many people as possible to be joining us. All right.
Thank you.
Thanks, Manda. Bye for now.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.